So our next speaker is Miles Picus, who's one of the genetic counselors in the Providence system. And his task today is to talk a little about genetics and what we know about it and how we can help our patients with melanoma. So thanks, Miles.
Thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Miles Picus. I'm a board certified and licensed genetic counselor. And today I will be talking with you guys about genetic counseling and testing for melanoma. So first of all, can I get a quick show of hands? How many of y'all have heard of a genetic counselor? Okay. All right. Better than I expected. That's good. It's a brand new field. So for those of you that don't know, really what our role is to provide a genetic risk assessment for our patients based on their family history of cancer and maybe some genetic test results. So is there a hereditary genetic mutation that might be inherited in a family? And based on those genetic risk assessments, we can make certain screening and management recommendations for our patients, whether that is screening for preventative cancer care or preventative surgery or targeted therapies as well. So with that, today I plan on talking a little bit about what is genetic testing, introduce you guys to the world of cancer genetics. What are we looking for when we're doing genetic testing, and what are the different types of results that we can get? Who should get genetic testing? So what are the personal and family history clinical indicators for who should get a referral for genetic counseling and testing? The usefulness, so what is the clinical utility of genetic testing and what it can do for our patients and their families? And lastly, a couple resources on how to get referred. So to start off with kind of a bird's eye view, we have about 20,000 genes in the body and they all perform different kinds of functions. There are about 100 or so genes at this point that we know of that are responsible for protecting the body from getting cancer. So some of you may have heard of BRCA1 and BRCA2 or BRCA1 and BRCA2. These are actually called tumor suppressor genes. So their job is to suppress tumors from happening in the body. Some people call them the guardian angels of our body, in that they protect the body from getting cancer. We all have these genes, and there are about 100 of other genes that are responsible for performing similar functions. So for all of these genes, we have two copies represented by those two blue bars on the left. And the reason why is for every gene, we get one copy from our mom and one copy from our dad. Genes are made up of DNA, which is that double helix structure. And then DNA is really this code of chemical letters, A, T, G, and C, ordered a specific way. So analogous to how a computer code is made up of ones and zeros, the code for life form in general is made up of these four letters, which stand for four chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So what we're looking for really are misspellings in the genetic code, or mutations, or what we call pathogenic variants in these genes. So you can see that A in red there was substituted for what was supposed to be a T. And that is one form of a mutation called a single base substitution. Mutations come in all different forms. Sometimes a couple letters get inserted or a couple letters get deleted. Essentially, the idea is that when you have a normal gene, its job is to make protein, and that protein does the job the gene instructs the body to do. When you have a mutation in that gene, then it can disrupt the function of the gene. It doesn't make the protein. And so when we're thinking about a gene that is supposed to protect the body from getting cancer, from getting melanoma, and there's a mutation in that gene, that's where that increased risk for melanoma or other types of cancers can come from, or that genetic predisposition. So genetic testing is typically done with either a blood or saliva sample. There is DNA in both of these samples. And what we do is we send off these samples to a clinically certified genetic testing lab, and they unwind the DNA of all the genes there that we ordered for them to look at. And then basically they're spelling out every single gene, doing full gene sequencing, and they're looking for these mutations in these genes. A couple weeks later, we get a report back. And based on that report, we can make specific screening and management recommendations. So if we get a positive result, we'll know exactly what mutation and what gene that mutation is in. And then based on that, a lot of these genetic mutations have more than one cancer association. So what are the different cancers associated with that genetic mutation? What are the specific lifetime risks? And then based on those lifetime risks, what do we recommend for screening, for imaging, how frequent, preventative surgeries, targeted therapies, things like that. So when we're thinking about hereditary cancer specific to melanoma, First of all, most melanoma is sporadic, meaning environmental, not genetic, kind of random, without a significant or prior family history of melanoma. Only about 10 to 15% of all melanomas occur in the presence of a significant family history. And only in about half of these do we find a hereditary genetic mutation. And meaning a mutation in one of these genes on the right there. And there are some other preliminary evidence genes as well. And then there is that familial portion, which are, melanomas that occur in the presence of a strong family history of melanoma, but we can't find a hereditary, like one single hereditary genetic mutation associated with that yet. And that's either because we haven't discovered the gene for it yet, or there's maybe a culmination of shared environmental and polygenic risk that is causing a familial pattern of melanoma. So if we look into these genes on the right a little bit, focusing mostly on CDKN2A on the top right and CDK4, these are two genes where mutations in them are associated with this genetic syndrome called familial atypical melanoma mole syndrome. And that genetic syndrome is associated with increased risk for melanoma, about a 50% lifetime risk, and increased risk for pancreatic cancer, about a 15 to 20% lifetime risk for pancreatic cancer. BAP1 is associated with melanoma of the skin as well as of the eye, so uveal melanoma, as well as increased risk for mesothelioma, which is a tumor of the lining of the lungs and other internal organs, and increased risk for renal cell carcinoma or kidney cancer. BRCA2 is associated with increased risk for breast, ovarian, pancreatic, prostate cancer, and melanoma, about a 5% lifetime risk for melanoma with BRCA2 mutations. And the list goes on, but really the point is that a lot of these genetic mutations have more than just melanoma risk. And so we can talk a little bit about, what the significance of that is in just a bit. But really when someone comes into clinic and they have a personal or family history of melanoma, we want to make sure these 9 genes are on the panel and maybe a couple more as well. So who should get genetic testing? We're not yet at the point where we're offering universal genetic testing. I just discussed, most melanoma is sporadic or not genetic in nature. So not everyone with melanoma should come rushing into genetics clinic. So according to the American Academy of Dermatology and the NCCN, these following guidelines are relevant for who should get a referral to genetic counseling and testing. So anyone with the presence of 3 or more invasive cutaneous melanomas, especially if one was diagnosed under the age of 45, with hereditary cancers, the age of onset tends to be younger. Anyone with 3 or more blood relatives on one side of the family who have had melanoma or pancreatic cancer, anyone with more than 50 melanocytic nevi or atypical moles and a family history of melanoma, anyone with 2 or more Spitz nevis, or now called BAP1 inactivated melanocytic tumors, or anyone with one of these tumors and a personal or family history of mesothelioma, meningioma, or uveal melanoma. And outside of melanoma too, anyone with these following indications should get genetic testing according to NCCN guidelines as well. So anyone with a personal or family history of pancreatic, ovarian, high risk or metastatic prostate cancer, male breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer, anyone with a personal or family history of a 1st or 2nd degree relative with breast, colon, endometrial, renal, gastric, or prostate cancer under the age of 50. And the list goes on. I'll give you a couple seconds to kind of just look through that. And then of note to anyone with Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry with a personal or family history of breast, prostate, pancreatic, or ovarian cancer as well. So what is the usefulness of genetic testing? So one, it can provide an explanation for someone's personal history of cancer. If we find that someone who's had melanoma also has a genetic mutation in a gene associated with melanoma, then more than likely it is that mutation that's what drove their cancer risk. So it does provide an answer for some people. Genetic testing can guide decisions about management and screening. So if someone has a genetic mutation in a gene associated with melanoma risk, then we want to make sure that they're getting frequent dermatological screening with total body skin exams, maybe every 3 to 6 months. And then, of course, as we've discussed with a lot of these genetic mutations, there is more than just melanoma risk. So we want to screen for other cancer risks as well. So for CDKN2A, for example, there is that increased pancreatic cancer risk. So we want to make sure these patients are getting high-risk pancreatic screening starting at 50 with endoscopic ultrasounds and pancreatic MRIs every year. With BAP1, there is renal cell carcinoma or kidney cancer risk as well. So we want to make sure that our patients know that they should be getting kidney ultrasounds every 2 to 3 years. Here at Providence, we are also offering a liquid biopsy early cancer detection test for everyone with a high-risk genetic mutation. And that is a blood test that can look for 50 different types of cancers based on methylation patterns in the blood. Brand new to the cancer space. And then genetic testing can also provide personalized treatment and targeted therapies as well. Genetic testing can provide relief if someone tests negative in the presence of a familial genetic mutation, then they're free from that genetic risk. It can provide less uncertainty for someone who is worried about their risk. They have a strong family history. A genetic test result can be black and white for them. And then, of course, genetics is a family affair. So when we know the genetic status of an individual or their family members, then we can help family members, test who might be at risk and then get otherwise healthy, unaffected individuals the right screening that they need for preventative cancer care. There are some limitations of genetic testing. Not all mutations can be found. The human genome was mapped about 20 years ago, so there's still a lot of genes to be discovered and a lot of mutations in those genes to work out and sort through as well. Sometimes we get these results that have some uncertain meaning. So these are called VUSs, or variants of uncertain significance. And basically what these are the lab finds a misspelling or a change in the genetic code, but they don't have enough data or evidence on that change yet to say, is this a benign, harmless change that's part of normal human genetic variation, or is this actually pathogenic, harmful, increases cancer risk? Most of the time, these VUSs are benign, but sometimes there is still some work in the gray area. And genetic test results, most importantly, indicate probability. Most of the time, it's a range of lifetime risk as opposed to certainty of developing cancer. Not all genetic tests are created equal. So with Black Friday and Christmas coming up, a lot of people will be rushing to get Ancestry.com and 23andMe tests for their family members. By all means, it is fun. It can give us a lot of information about our ancestry, but if we're thinking about getting one of these genetic tests for clinical purposes, don't. These direct-to-consumer ancestry tests use SNP technology, which is single nucleotide polymorphism technology, which means they only look at specific mutations within a gene and not full gene sequencing where they spell out all the letters of a gene. So 23andMe has a hereditary cancer test, for example, but they only look at specific mutations within BRCA1 and 2. It does not include the thousands of other mutations in those genes that someone may carry. There are many other genes outside of BRCA1 and 2 that are associated with melanoma and other cancer risks that we want to make sure that are on our patients' panels. So there is the concern of false reassurance with a negative genetic test result through one of these tests. And the FDA does recommend confirmatory testing through clinical lab if you do get a positive result in one of these tests. So instead, we should look to clinical grade genetic tests from CLIA certified genetic testing labs that do comprehensive full gene sequencing, so they can look for all sorts of mutations from those single base substitutions to deletions, duplications, inversions, what have you. For those of you that are thinking about genetic testing, but maybe worried about the ethical and legal implications, this may be useful information. So there is a federal law called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA for short, which is a law that prevents employers and health insurers from discriminating anyone based on their genetic status. So using a positive genetic test result as a pre-existing condition, for example. However, this law has some loopholes in that it doesn't apply for life insurance, long-term care, and disability insurance. So when I have patients come in that want to get genetic testing, I do ask them if they have these insurances set up, because if they don't and they apply for it later on, if they get a positive genetic test result, that can, have the life insurance companies raise their premiums on them or deny them altogether. So it's good to know beforehand. And lastly, how to get referred. If this is interest of you, please give our Providence Regional Genetics referral coordinators a call at this number or give us an email. for slide-specific questions. My email is down there on the bottom left. And we do have clinic availability. We have genetic counselors at Providence St. John's and at the Margie Peterson Breast Center, Providence St. Joseph's in Burbank. And we send genetic counselors out to Providence Holy Cross in Mission Hills, Providence Little Company of Mary in Torrance, and a whole team down in Providence, Orange County as well. And that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
That was great. Certainly, this is an evolving science. And, 10 years ago, we didn't have much in the way of genetics and melanoma. And again, it continues to evolve. And obviously, the question is, what is the impact on me and what is the impact on, say, my family and my kids?